afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Christina Fox, the CEO of Tech Alliance, and as the province of Ontario's Regional Innovation Centre for London and Southwestern Ontario, we're the place for dreamers, innovators, and world-changing ideas. We're focused on building tomorrow's globally competitive innovation economy that enables entrepreneurship, spurs accelerated growth, attracts ambitious talent, and new companies. Through our advisory services, our accelerator, and experiences like these with partners and participants like you, we are working together to ensure a prosperous return for Southwestern Ontario. Before we get started, let me share a few key points. Everyone is muted on today's webcast. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them through the Zoom Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. And of course, this webcast will be recorded and available afterwards and will be sent to you by email. If you'd like to keep up with everything there is to know about Southwestern Ontario's innovation economy, go ahead and sign up for our weekly newsletter. We'll drop that link in the chat. Resiliency and flexibility are key to navigating the kind of rapid change that our businesses and the innovation economy have experienced in recent months. Despite disruption, Southwestern Ontario innovators, entrepreneurs, and industry have adapted with urgency to create extraordinary solutions under circumstances that once felt impossible. Now we look to the next phase, reopening and re-entry into workspaces. Reopening is paramount for today's businesses and entrepreneurs, requiring thoughtful planning for workplaces, safety protocols, comfort levels, and all that goes into creating a new normal at work. This afternoon, in collaboration with Innovate Niagara and We Tech Alliance, we're proud to host business decision-making during reopening with our valued partner, Steve Karpenko of Ontario's Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade. Stephen is a senior business advisor with over 15 years experience working with small and medium-sized businesses on leading their operations and managing through challenging financial times. Stephen certainly excels at providing practical advice, focus for businesses, and knowledge about what the Ontario government programs are available. Steve is not a first timer with us on a webcast. I think now we've enjoyed Steve's experience and expertise at least 3 times. So Steve, welcome to you and your team.
Thank you very much, Christina. Great to be back, and a little bit of a continuation in this webinar from the previous one where we talked about managing through or navigating through challenging times. Now it's going to shift to reopening and kind of a chapter 2 of that, and we'll talk about decision-making during reopening, but obviously decision-making and leadership are closely intertwined in the sense that making the right decisions and then implementing and following through are a function of leadership. So we'll go through both at the same time.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Should we get started?
We shall. Go for it.
All right. This picture really resonated with me for reopening, for our what we've been through the last 5 or 6 months, in the sense that with these climbers trying to get across this crevasse on Mount Everest, there really is no way to prepare for that. And it really illustrates a lot of the leadership concepts that we need to put into practice right now. And maybe in the past, I might have used a gymnast on a balance beam or a race car on a road course. But the difference is with that balance beam, although the circumstances are very competitive and the skills required very challenging, you can lower that balance beam and reduce the risk and practice and improve your skills and get better. Likewise, you can slow down the speed of the car on the roadway and get used to the curves so that you don't wipe out. But in this situation, and in what a lot of us are going through as business leaders, there really is no preparation for it. And when you think of the different leadership that comes into play on the right-hand side, we have first of all, goals, and having a goal is so important. And in the case of climbing Mount Everest, the long-term goal, the big goal, is to get to the top of the mountain. But in between, there are many crucial short-term goals, one of which is illustrated here, of just getting to the other side. And the commitment that requires to say that I can put my fear aside, I can put my sense of danger aside, and have the courage to take those first steps. So once I've decided to step, that I've already done a lot, and then the focus that's required to keep stepping in order to get to the other side, and having the stamina to follow through towards that goal. And then if you're the first across or the second across, to be a leader and to create that follow me type of culture where everyone can focus on the goal and have the courage to step, and then the focus to get to the other side. And to me, that really exemplifies what we're going through right now. And during reopening, those who execute better and are prepared and really willing to take those steps, I think will be best off on the other side. Who knows when that will be, but reopening is something that's happening day by day. So once leaders decide what to do, they must act with resolve. And what we're talking about is visible decisiveness, also known as leading from the front. And not only builds the organization's confidence in the leaders and the decisions that we need to implement today, but also motivating the network of teams. And I'll get back to that, but suffice to say, motivates the team to sustain its search for solutions to the challenges that the organization faces. In other words, it's not just when the leader's present or when the boss is present that we're working hard on those short-term goals and achieving success, but even when we're alone, that we're motivated to continue looking for areas to improve and make things better as we reopen. And that teamwork, the synergies of that pay off immensely. So for today's agenda, we'll revisit the reopening toolkit because that continues to evolve. We'll take the pulse of where we are today with some more current data, and then we'll jump into the strategic leadership concepts and the decision-making during reopening, and then close off with just a few points on reopening and reinventing. So let's look at the toolkit. The web address is at the bottom of this slide, and Sarah will be distributing them to everyone, so you don't have to record them or take notes or anything like that. But the reopening toolkit, what we're working on now with the province is to create guidance notes and tip sheets on a sector by sector basis. And I've shown 4 here just to give you an idea, but there are dozens of different sectors and subsectors that have different guidelines and different engineering around the implementation of PPE. For example, if you're a manufacturing organization versus service operating virtually or still together in person, there'll be different guidelines that apply. So what we hear about in the news and what we see there are more of the general policy and almost civic bylaws around, for example, face mask coverings. But within our offices and businesses, there are a lot of different things that come into play. And so we've done our best to accumulate those into kind of best practices, tip sheets and guidance. So make sure you access that and see if there's anything. And the second new thing are these posters that we've created around just workplace health and safety guidelines. And we know that by reinforcing positive messages that that behavior tends to be internalized and practiced on a daily basis almost without thinking, just as a force of positive habit. And so again, here are 2 examples, but there are dozens of different posters and you can drop your logo onto these, but just placing the right message in the right amount at the right place can really go a long way to helping people feel that they're being taken care of, as well as reinforcing those positive messages. So that's part of the reopening toolkit. The other thing is sourcing PPE, and I know that the local chambers and every organization has been working hard to support its memberships and local business community. But just a reminder that the province also has a centralized PPE supplier directory. Maybe you've had some challenges finding a source of supply. I think a lot of that has been alleviated, but we don't know what's coming. And I would treat PPE just like any other inventory item that you have, or like paper for the photocopier, where you just have a stock on hand and you have reorder points so that you make sure you're not left without, and that you kind of have an awareness and keeping track of how much usage you have, maybe on a per employee basis or per office basis, to make sure that, again, just like managing inventory, you have your in-stock position, your safety stock, your reorder point, and then your time to delivery, and that those things all work together for your PPE as well. And then the Canadian Business Resilience Network has their own checklist, and this to me is kind of the most basic things to pay attention to when reopening, as far as the reopening toolkit, and that's just making sure that processes, new policies are well communicated and known to everybody, written down, those posters are put in place. that from a financial standpoint, you know where the government supports, when they're running out, so that you don't get caught shorthanded with cash, and that you have access to whatever funds are there to support you. And also taking care of people in terms of like the social services and the personal touches of being aware of childcare needs and other family supports that everyone is dealing with. And it's a pretty wide array now, and we're all going through different things, and everyone's challenged kind of in a different way. And just having an accounting almost to those to make sure that every business owner or leader can provide as much support as possible. One thing I get asked about are video conferencing options. And I know there are a lot of consultants, people in the service industry on the call, and you may have the best handle on this, but nonetheless, needs change, and you might want to be more forward thinking or expanding your business, the virtual side of it, expanding or your work at home program. So we've provided an analysis, and this is based on the Gartner Group summary of video conferencing platforms. You can see in the top right, you have the Zoom and Cisco WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Citrix with their LogMeIn, formerly GoToMeeting platform. Then a little bit to the left, Adobe Connect and Google Hangouts. These platforms are the ones that work. They're proven. They've been in the marketplace a long time. I'd say that in terms of budgeting, if you're looking for a free solution, Zoom has some pretty generous guidelines. It may change, but basically up to, I think it's 100 participants for meetings of up to 40 minutes in length. That's going to meet a lot of requirements. But if you have to go beyond that in terms of the professional editions, some do cost significantly more, but the majority of them are really in the $500 to $1,000 ballpark in terms of an annual budget for video conferencing. And that's a pretty small investment when you think of what's at stake, especially if you're doing any kind of global business or advising that's gone from being in-person and travel-based to virtual. So there's a summary, and in the appendix notes, we've provided a more detailed comparison, side-by-side comparison of video conferencing solutions. Because the thing is, if you just Google what are the best video conferencing platforms, there are probably hundreds of them, and we want you to focus on the ones that are the top ones that are proven and will support your business. So let's take the pulse of where we are right now nationally. So this is based on the Canadian Federation of Independent Business Survey of August 5th, 2020. So it's just 2 weeks old now. Nationally, 63% of businesses were fully open, 34% partially open, and 3% fully closed. Now, I know we've seen some business failures and that kind of thing, but the reality is about 5 to 10% of small to medium-sized companies in Canada turn over every year. And so that number is almost on average for the last 6 months. Let's focus on the ones that are open fully or partially and try and get that 63%, or sorry, that 34% up higher. And then of those that are open or partially open, 72% are making more than half of normal sales, but only 26% are at or above normal sales. So let's try and get that 72% higher, but it is trending up because on July 1st, the number of those who are making only 50% or higher were at 59%. So we're on the positive slope there. But the challenge with that is that if you're only at half your normal sales level or 60%, you're just barely breaking even on your cost of sales. And that puts a lot of pressure in terms of overheads and administrative staff and any kind of costs that are on the table. And so it really is important that we keep driving that number through reopening, and in the next, say, 6 to 12 months, see that 26% get a lot higher. But again, it's trending up versus 23% on July the 1st. So it's kind of that's the half full, cup half full, and maybe a little bit of half empty side of the story. In terms of world merchandise trade volume, that's another thing for any of you who are into exporting. You can see the numbers 1 and 2. That represents the last major economic collapse that we had in 2008, post 2008. And you can see from the blue line, it dipping and then coming back. And that was over a period of about 2 years. And you can see on the right-hand side, the green line, which is our current situation, that has more or less the same shape as the 2008 recession. And so that really is the optimistic scenario, and it's possible. The pessimistic, on the other hand, is shaped by the red line, and these numbers come from the World Trade Organization, and they're expecting between 13 and 32% decline in world merchandise trade volume. The good news is that stats are coming out literally as of today, showing that as much as we've had a pretty big decline this year, that 2021, 22 are looking really optimistic in terms of turning around not only world merchandise trade, but employment levels and different measures that way. So the forecasts look optimistic. It's just a matter of us keeping at it and implementing maybe some of the best practices that we'll go into in a few minutes. So just to summarize global trends, obviously North America and Asia having the largest markets would probably suffer the biggest hit, but at the same time being big and having the benefit of economies of scale also can execute bigger rebounds. And the trade will fall in steeper in sectors with tight supply chains like electronics and automotive, where they're really pull-based. So the lack of demand on the customer side really trickled back through the supply chain, and there wasn't, and then as things pick up, there were just inventory imbalances, shortages at first, and then excesses as we pump more stuff into the pipeline. And so there's a little bit of upheaval there that hopefully will sort itself out over time. But services also affected, and hopefully a lot of the services companies are starting to make the full transition to virtual and work at home, and take advantage of the fact that software still works, whether it's installed in person or remotely, and that sales can still be done pretty effectively as buyers adapt to the new technologies as well as sellers. But obviously the impacts are here for now, but the trends are very positive in the next year to 2 years. Of course, the challenges that were there before, and if you attended the last presentation, we saw the signs of a recession in late 2019 in terms of declining energy prices and a pullback in manufacturing. And maybe part of what we're going through now was inevitable anyway, in the sense that with the recession, and the severity, of course, we'll never know because it kind of commingled with the COVID pandemic. But there were a number of challenges on the horizon, whether it was the closing and consolidation of businesses, the challenge of attracting the right talent and dealing with a global workforce, the trade wars or the trade skirmishes that are happening now were kind of in the works before, and they're with us today. Changing customer preferences of the pandemic has really put pressure on, we've seen the boom in e-commerce, which has put pressure on traditional retail and the goods producing sector in terms of interaction with customers, and that's going to continue. And it's all these things are going to continue with the background of instability in financial markets. And even though interest rates are very low right now, creditors are tightening their lending restrictions and putting new covenants on loans, and loans that are becoming due are being scrutinized more than ever before. So it's not just the markets in terms of the stock market, but it's financial credit markets that are probably more important and hitting closer to home with today's business. And then just the quality of decision-making and dependence on technology adoption, real-time data analytics for higher quality decisions. So these challenges were here before, and they're here with us now as we shift into recovery. But now let's change gears a little bit and get into this whole notion of strategic leadership, decision-making during reopening. And one of the things that we really need to take care of is today's business, and things that can be done really without more of an investment than energy and time, minimal financial investment. And the first thing is just refocusing the company and your staff on just the valuable work that everyone's doing to get us this far, and really literally to keep up the good work and stay focused and have courage and all those things I introduced in that first slide, that those are so critical as we move through every phase. But as a leader, it's your job to create that focus and bring that messaging to your team, and also, I guess, to your customers, and through collaboration maybe if it's knocking on new doors and seeking new markets, new customers, that you lead with messaging that is maybe a little bit bolder or a little bit more courageous than you would have before. But it's a chance to take advantage of that customers are expecting that collaboration and that feeling that, hey, the investments aren't just in the short term, but as a customer to you as a supplier, we'll be together through this and then for the long term. And letting your brand speak, this is primarily if you're involved in advertising, on your packaging, in social media, it's the kind of the shared challenge and the we're in this together message is probably becoming a little bit cliche now, but what's your own version of that? And what are you sharing with your customers and really lighting a fire under your brand to let that messaging come through? And it really helps with that collaboration. And then the next point, reimagining trust. And there's more going on today than just the pandemic. Like I mentioned, the recession and other socio-cultural dynamics that are going on. So renewing and reimagining trust is certainly an opportunity that we have on the table now, more so than maybe ever before. And then, of course, the need to communicate nonstop. So there really is a role for the leader right now that is non-financial in terms of taking today's business without changing your business model, working with what you have, a great opportunity to really step up and lead through the reopening. But I'd like to the strategic side of it, which is how as leaders and in not just day to day, but in formulating the decisions we have to make and the choices we have, how are we spending our time and looking at the different things we have to do? And this quadrant comes from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and I certainly never forgot it. And that book's probably going on 25 years old, but so many of the messages are current today, and maybe more so because of the situation, that really it's about knowing what's important and urgent, what's important and not urgent, and being able to separate the two and not spend nearly as much time on what isn't important, and getting a sense for, are you kind of thinking that because something is urgent in the eyes of one person, that it's something that needs to detract from the whole company? I would say that it's really more important to isolate the things that really are important. And when you look at quadrant 2, not urgent, that's really the planning and the strategy side of it. And when we talk about shifting business models to deal with reopening and new opportunities through the pandemic, that setting time aside in that quadrant 2 is super important. Quadrant 1, urgent and important, you've got to deal with it, but at the same time being very cognizant of setting time aside for this quadrant 2 activity, and maybe it's more frequent but less time consuming. So in the old days, maybe we'd go off on a retreat for 1, 2, or 3 days, or have a golf outing or something like that, team building exercise. Those opportunities may not exist anymore, and the time available may not be there because of everything that's going on. But just making sure that that quadrant 2 time is still set aside to do some of the strategizing that we'll go through in a minute, and to involve the team in those decisions, and that will improve the outcome significantly. Crisis as moments of opportunity, crisis as moments of change, and change equates to opportunity. And when you look at the different things of first step is to face the challenge and know where the money is. I'm sure everyone's been through that already. And then number 4, we already touched on leading from the front, volunteering during moment of crisis. I'm also sure that that's gone on. But it's number 3 and 5 that are maybe really important today through reopening. And you may have felt the world or the pressure or the stress of the business and your business survival during the crisis, the past, say, 3-4 months. That I think it's really important if we can get that off of your shoulders and start to distribute the responsibility throughout the team. And by having more time for that quadrant 2 type of activity, I think that will go a long way towards that. And then once you've identified what it is that you're going to do and taken some of those decisions to move you forward, that if they look like good opportunities with manageable risk, I'd say there's a great chance to be aggressive in the marketplace and really lead through and make some big strides through reopening. So we've all gone through the reopening models, and here's some pictures from the early spring. Put a check mark next to that. Great job, everyone. I think, but now a lot of the things that were decided back then are now part of our normal. And the question is, how do we get from that to what we're going to be in the next 6 to 12 to 24 months? And I have a couple pictures here that I've shared in the past presentation. The automated self-service grocery store in the top left, reconfiguring airplanes and other transportation in the bottom left, and then reinvesting in smart technology, industrial internet, the factory of the future. Those things really are what we're working on or need to work on today, because the reality is our larger competitors are making these steps. And if you're following companies like Tesla and Elon Musk, they're very bold right now and saying, hey, we can do this despite the circumstances, and it's me on maybe as a leader bringing the right resources so that we can take advantage of opportunities that are out there. So that's kind of the theory of it. And when we get into the practical, how do you do that? Here's a tool that I've used a lot with companies, and it's from a company called Strategizer, and it's just become the de facto almost standard in terms of identifying and breaking things down. And it's called the business model canvas. And I'll just go through the different sections, key sections. The first is your value proposition. And this is the key differentiation that you have in the marketplace, your unique selling proposition, what makes you different. That's one of the key components. The other are the major relationships and resources that you have access to from a strategic standpoint. How do I create that value? Do I have those big building blocks that I need? And then that, of course, translates into the right-hand side, which are the customer relationships that you build and the channels, whether it's channel marketing or your supply chain, sources of supply, and then translating that into, of course, into your revenue streams and selling through those channels. And then on the bottom left is the cost structure that you have that's designed to support that revenue generation and, of course, profit generation. And then the action plan or key activities on the left-hand side. So that's an overview of the canvas. But what we need to do today is to use this tool and use this structure to say, what's working for us when we look at these different things. For example, our key partnerships are still intact. And I think that'll be the case with a lot of businesses, especially those who've been around for a while. Your customer segments probably haven't changed that much unless you've done a real pivot maybe towards manufacturing PPE or something that was a brand new opportunity. Your customer segments probably are similar to what they were. And the key resources you have had, although circumstances will be different, but in terms of the capital that you have, the key assets, could be plant and equipment, are probably still in place, and the customer relationships that you had. But where we've seen the major change are the disruptions in the channels. And it could be, as an example, a restaurant that had a catering business. And what we would typically see is that the catering side, as it grew, could ultimately grow to 65% of the revenue of that restaurant, so that it could use underused assets like kitchen space in off hours, the ability to bring staff in at night to prepare orders for the next day that ship out at 8 or 8:30 in the morning. All that, so that would be a major disruption, because now the catering, certainly office side catering, large parties, has literally disappeared. We talked about the auto and electronic sectors in terms of the tightness of the supply chains and the uncertainty that we have, causing disruption both on the inventory side and on the demand side of things. And in-person sales, if you're in the service sector, that is now being replaced, and we're learning, but was really disrupted with and being replaced by virtual. But those are all examples of channel disruption, which of course disrupts the value proposition, because maybe what you were known for before or what made you different is no longer possible for you to deliver. So the question becomes, how do I still deliver value to my customers, given the fact that circumstances have changed and maybe my ability to deliver, or I'm no longer allowed to do that? What can I do differently with those channel relationships that I have? And of course, the disruption to the revenue stream. a question mark on cost structure. So as you start to, when you look at those things that are in green, the first thing is to say, how do I continue to maintain the positive side of my business model? And then where the disruptions have happened, whether it's your channels, revenue, and your value proposition, how do what opportunities do I have, and how can I creatively brainstorm something that is manageable and brings customer value, allows me to connect with my loyal customers, and maybe even opens new doors. And that really is the challenge. And the business model canvas allows us to break things down a little bit. And so as you start to evaluate alternatives, and this is the decision-making part, making sure that you have the right information around things like your cost structure. How much is it going to cost us? Do we have the money in the bank? Do we have access to the capital to make it happen? And then, of course, there needs to be an action plan developed around that. And that's how we can use the canvas today. It's not to start with a blank slate, because that would be a real challenge, but more to evaluate and identify what's still working, and then where the disruptions are, and how can we bring the parts that are working to bear to help us solve the disruptions and renew our value proposition to our customer base. And having a lens to where we were before, where we are today, and then setting those goals, whether it's at first it may be a 1-month goal, 6-month goal, and then beyond that in terms of post-COVID value proposition. So we talk about adding value a lot, and I just want to go into that a little bit more to make it clear. And this is a model that we use in lean operations, which is basically says that your suppliers, they provide inputs to you. It could be a product that you're going to resell. It could be information that you subscribe to that you repackage as a consulting or advising firm. It could be legal inputs from the courts that as a law firm that you repackage. But then there's something that goes on, which is your value addition. And that's the processes, the things you do, and the outputs that you create that your suppliers aren't or not able to, or are not in the market of that their preference may be to reach the end customer via their relationship with you, but that you're definitely adding value as you go along and producing a unique output that your customers will pay you for. And that's really what the difference between your cost, i.e. what you pay your suppliers, and what your customers pays you is the value that you bring or the value that you add. Because if you don't, your suppliers will find a way, and this has kind of been the e-commerce conundrum, if you will, that everyone has been trying to figure out in retail, which is, do I continue to keep my stores open? Do I shift to an e-commerce only model? Do I have a hybrid? But meantime, what's happening is Amazon, and now you have Walmart getting in the game big time, that they're continuing to grow, and they're continuing to find ways to kind of bypass traditional channels. And that's part of this whole business model thing, is rediscovering how do I add value according to this definition of the model. And I'll show you this chart. It's other sources of value. So I think when you look at the business model canvas and the last few slides that I showed, that we're looking a little bit more on the revenue side and how to generate revenue, how to connect with customers, and then kind of fitting a cost structure around that that'll allow us to remain cash flow positive and ultimately profitable. But there is an operational side of it, which is today's business again. And without going into the details of what the list of each of these sources of value are on the left, and these come from, if anyone's familiar with lean processes or Lean Six Sigma, that these are the different ways that organizations create operational value, i.e. reduce cost through waste reduction, through giving the customers what they want. It could be better customer service. And that's the list on the left. And what I just highlighted in green are the size of the business, less than 50, which is probably 95% of Canadian companies, the percentage of companies that have implemented each of these various service or operational improvements. So that's, you can see very few of them are greater than 60%, compared to what I just highlighted on the right, which are the larger companies. greater than 250 employees. They are the competitors, and you can see so many of them are at 80 or 100% of the companies have implemented these best practices around waste reduction and profit generation or margin generation. And you can see the gap. And the point is that there are definitely ways to look at your operation, to lean it out a little bit, and to free up cash and to create cash value within your business through lean practices, because the larger the competitor, the more value they've derived out of that. And also another fact is that only about 65% of Canadian businesses have a website and or participate in e-commerce. And so that's a bit of a disadvantage. I mean, the change and the shift was so sudden. How could we have anticipated it? But at the same time, those who have already taken steps, and it's not just e-commerce, but process improvement, elimination of waste, preventative maintenance programs, and technology adoption around data analytics and real-time decision-making, have a huge running start. And so if you haven't done anything about that, this is an area where you can really look at your existing operations and start to squeeze out more cash. So when you're doing this and coming back to decision-making and some tools, I think that every decision really has a test or a hypothesis around it, which is to say, we think X will happen. And here's a test card from the book, Testing Business Ideas by David J. Bland. And this is the same firm Strategizer that developed the business model Canvas, is that it's not so much that every decision needs to have a written evaluation card, or that you even need to implement this in any formal way. But maybe it's something that you could print out and put on your own, in front of your own home office, or share it amongst your team, and just to say that we think that every decision, really, we need a hypothesis, i.e. we think something is going to happen. We need to verify it before we commit to it. We need to measure it before we commit to it. And we'll know we're right if we've met the following metrics. And that by going through that test, that you really have a much higher quality decision than you would without it. And I think that probably subconsciously this is a norm. But there's ways to skip steps, and we could skip the measurement, and we can say, well, we don't have the data for that, or we're not quite sure. I would say in that case, make something up, like almost not fake it till you make it, but at the same time, there's always a way to measure something in a decision. And then in advertising, especially like Facebook ads and stuff like that, we do A/B testing, where we have more than one version of an ad and we choose the best one, and then have another one and choose the best one there. So this comparison of options is something that we do using analytics when we're looking at our web performance, feedback from social media, customer interviews, and then testing incrementally and seeking input and managing the risk around these decisions. And also being agile, such that if something doesn't appear to be right, that we reevaluate it, and that we're able to pivot away from the thing that's not working towards the thing that is working without undue additional cost. And so that's the test card. It's more of a test process, or 4 check marks that you might put next to a decision that you're making to make sure that you've done your best to evaluate the options in front of you. When we think about leading through change, I dropped a term before right at the beginning called network of teams. And what this means is that you make sure that along the 4 key points I'm about to show you, that you have the source of input on the information you need on each of these 4 key areas. And it's not to say that your org chart changes, or that you need to hire somebody or dedicate somebody to each of these areas. But it does mean that you need to identify who is going to be your go-to person for this information. And if you're a sole proprietor, if you're just working on your own, that you make sure that you have, maybe it's a 4-column chart, and you make sure you put down the information that you need and keep current around these 4 points. And the first one is just your workforce and customer protection, your PPE acquisition, conformance to guidelines, making sure that it's communicated, the things I've said, like the value of what everyone's doing and giving that comfort that everyone is safe at work, not just employees, but also customers. So that's priority number one, and making sure that you have your finger on the pulse of that. The second is supply chain stabilization. So if you've experienced any supply chain disruptions, making sure that you know what's happening in that area, who are your alternate suppliers, what is the impact in terms of inventory levels, are there stockouts on the horizon, should you be devoting more time into that kind of quadrant one, urgent and important, to make sure that you have the stock on hand so that you can continue to do business with your customers. And then of course, customer engagement. Are orders being fulfilled on time? Are you short shipping when you shouldn't be? Are you getting the feedback from customers? Maybe you can engage somebody on your team to create surveys that go out periodically. I know I get a lot of them. You probably do as well, but it's a great way in the virtual world to touch on things, making sure that this is one of your top priorities in terms of having the information about customer satisfaction. And then, of course, financial stress testing, knowing what your cash flow situation is. Is it positive? Is your banker calling on you and wanting a meeting? Don't ignore that. And making sure that you know where your financial stresses are today, 6 months from now, maybe even a year from now. And so to summarize, I just make sure that these four areas are identified, and within your team that those responsibilities are accounted for, and that you have a go-to person, an email away, a phone call away, that you can get the information you need to make the decisions that you need to around operations. So within reopening, we're going through this discover, i.e. problem identification, deciding what to do, designing solutions, and then delivering. We're in this cycle kind of constantly, and it's we don't really have the downtime or the breathing space that maybe we had a year ago. And even with the up and coming kind of recessionary things that were on the horizon, some of this was starting to happen, and then the pandemic hit. So the thing is that what we need as leaders for crisis decision making is a lot of the tools that we've talked about already, and the mindset and the involvement of team and the communication, so that you can really be forward thinking and not second guessing decisions, that you have the tools and the process in place to say, I've made the best decision I can with the information and resources that I have. Let's do it well, and then focus on execution and timely implementation, and not looking back, because the next one's coming right after that. And making sure that with those processes in place, that you have confidence in your ability to turn these decisions over and keep moving forward as we reopen. So we're pausing to assess, anticipating, managing risk, and then acting. So here's another tool, a decision-making framework. Again, this isn't something that needs to be formalized. God knows we have enough to do already. In terms of when anyone is making a decision, especially if they've been kind of delegated the authority to do that we're considering not just the benefits, but also the costs and also the risks involved in the different options. So we have a cost benefit side, but then we have a risk, and evaluating whether it's high, medium, or low. And for the high to medium, can that risk be mitigated confidently, so that we can derive the net benefit of that option. So just having that discipline in place, again, maybe this is something that you print out and you post and say, please everyone, make sure that when you're doing something on the job, that you consider not just the upside to it, but also the cost, short-term and long-term. And then if there are any risks involved, and then look at each option individually, make your decision, and then let's go ahead, as I just said. So part of this and kind of the final piece of the puzzle is what's called the RACI model, which is identifying who's responsible, i.e. who's going to be doing the work, who's accountable, i.e. who's the team lead, supervisor, ultimately who is the responsibility stopping with, but who needs also to be consulted before making that decision. And once a decision is made, who do we need to inform? And so this simple chart could apply to pretty much any business, which is at a high level, what are the different activities or areas where decisions are happening down the left-hand side, and then across the top, the different people who are involved. And just having this tool to communicate to everyone where the flow is and who is responsible and who's going to be doing it, who is accountable if there's a problem or question, who needs to be consulted, and then ultimately the communication of a new decision, policy, procedure throughout the team, organization, that with a model or a tool like this, everyone knows what the other is doing. And I think that, again, when you come back to that decision-making cycle and the number and speed of decisions that we need to make, that we have something in place like this to really improve the quality of communication and make sure that everyone is informed and comfortable in their role. So we're demonstrating deliberate calm, bounded optimism, and most importantly, empathy. And that empathy part is just the listening skills and the acknowledgement, and just making sure that we understand that if we're feeling stressed by a situation or uncomfortable, that guaranteed everyone has their own version of that. And we all have our family and home lives as well. And that probably today more than ever, it's important to put things in place that, and I'm a great believer in kind of systematic approaches, and as much as we can standardize and create awareness around different supports that we put in place so that people know what to expect when things happen, and we'll know that if there are consequences or what to expect from leadership as people just literally go through their day-to-day challenge of life. So just to summarize, reopening and reinventing, we've talked a lot about navigating the uncertainties and mitigating challenges through our decision-making processes and tools and best practices. Let's just summarize and we'll call it building a better future. And the first set of decisions that we'll be making are around people and putting people first. Communication, I've touched on that quite a bit, and care, and different supports, and every business is different, and every team is different, and every town is different. And I think any leader now is fully aware about putting people first and the benefits that come from that. The second thing is designing spaces that work. Right now, there's been the great shift to work from home, some of it mandated, some of it probably in hindsight makes a lot of sense and will continue. But the first step is to make the decisions and implement stuff that sustains the workplace, whether it's at home, the logistics of comfort and sitting at a computer all day, making sure that if you have an office-based or retail storefront that you secured and and put the PPE in place. But then I think the next step is to rethink, and it kind of comes in conjunction with that business model canvas, rethinking your workspace for the long term. But of course, solving in phases and strategizing, using that quadrant 2 space, important but not urgent, to identify and break things down into chunks so that you can mitigate risk, both maybe financially in terms of investment, but also unforeseen circumstances, set clear priorities, and then lead through the implementation. Being elastic in terms of your cost structures. So we go back to that business model canvas, and different solutions will have different costs associated with them. And what this point really means are things like maybe not committing to long-term debt if you don't know what your outcome is going to be, and having maybe a flexible source of supply, multiple suppliers to mitigate risks associated with costs, because if you're dealing with a situation where you have no choice, costs tend to rise. So reducing costs, transforming those cost structures, and then managing into the future and maximizing profit. And then just getting future ready by keeping those listening channels open. If you have a new business model, you're being aggressive in the marketplace, being ready to scale up, and then being agile and flexible to those unforeseen circumstances. But I think if we did all the stuff that I've mentioned over the last 40 minutes or so, that there's a lot of opportunity to maintain that agility and stay flexible and take advantage of the opportunity that comes with change. So thank you very much, everyone. I know it's a lot of information, but if you can implement and take away just 1 or 2 ideas, you'll probably be much better off than you were an hour ago. So thanks very much.
Thanks to you, Steve. This was a much anticipated webcast, and you presented a bunch of ideas for emerging from the pandemic stronger. And I really like how you led your content with the goals, stamina, courage, and leadership, I think it was a perfect way to set the stage for today's dialogue. So I'm just going to do a quick time check here. I think I'm going to go with one question that we have jotted down that focuses a little bit more on safe and planned reentry, and really acknowledges the piece that you mentioned at the end about designing a workspace. So here's my question. With all that there is to consider with reentry from safety to staffing and other new requirements, are there any specific government programs or grants that are available to help businesses with the added economic burden of PPE or other, office and workspace modifications in design, or any materials that you can offer about monitoring staff or customers for COVID symptoms or anything like that? Some of the things that are still top of mind as people begin to look at safe reentry into the workplaces. So I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Okay, want to take a shot at that, Rafael?
Sure. Okay. I'll take a shot at that one. According to what you mentioned, Christina, there is some things that there is no grants per se right now. There is some relief programs that the government did. There is, of course, a 3.3 billion that they put on the healthcare system. They did a 3.7 billion to support, of course, people and support people and jobs. There is a few programs called the LEAP, which is the Low Income Energy Assistance Program. Besides that, there is also the financial relief that it was from April to October. And the province would not apply any penalties for taxes. Same for property. So the taxes, property taxes will be delayed or will be deferred until August or October. Besides that, the Ontario Together Fund, and Stephen mentioned something about that, is a 50 million program in that companies that they need to readjust or making some adjustments within the company. They can apply to, let's say a company wants to do some mask or face shields or any thermometers, ventilators, anything that has to be with PPE. There is a fund for that. It's not a grant per se, but they can apply for this fund and they can get that money to readjust their factory or their plant or the manufacturing facility to do all the changes they need to do. If company decides to open and it's fully now open to their previews or kind of similar to that, there is the CanExport Fund, and that is still available. The companies that are, well, they're going back to exporting their product. If they want to go back to exporting the product to different markets, some of these trade shows are now virtual, but they have cost involved. So if they want to participate in these trade shows, of course, there is they can apply for this CanExport Fund, and that's a grant for that. That's what I have for not a specific one, but it's the different ones.
Okay, well, I think it bears introducing you, Rafael, since we've got you on this call now. You've popped in, so thank you so much for providing some support to that particular question. For those of you on the webcast, Rafael is the Senior Export Advisor, Business Capacity and Readiness Branch, Business Partnerships and Programs Division with the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. Now, there was another quick question that's come in, Stephen and Rafael, on the chat. Just doing quick time check here. Rafael, is there any other comments that you would like to make in closing before I offer my closing comments? Or do we want to take a moment to take a look at the question that's come through? I can happily share it out loud for everybody. And then if there's information you can provide, that would be really helpful. And if not, if it requires a bit of information from you and your team, and we can share some of that back with either a link or some commentary when we send out our note to the participants. So the question that's come in says, you mentioned a couple of times the importance and increased reliance on real-time data and analytics. Can you talk about the importance of data in terms of keeping employees and the family safe and protecting your company with historical data around your health and safety controls to defend against insurance claims or insurance increases in claims and potential legal claims, as they've seen from a couple of larger companies because of sickness or death? It's a big question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Steve?
I mean, I guess when you come kind of the first part of, which is collecting data, we can always measure whatever it is we want, whether it's employee absences and kind of recording reasons and stuff like that. But to me, it's we're not even there yet in terms of even understanding. I mean, we're just barely dealing with the engineering of the workplace with PPE and putting in, plastic screens and wearing face masks. And I would imagine, though, that the tech sector that will start to evolve very quickly in terms of app-based and devices that leverage the power of the mobile phone, whether it's taking temperature readings or proximity or variations on the new federal app in terms of proximity to people who have been exposed. I think there's going to be a ton of innovation because Rafael and I were talking about this. There's no sign that the new normal is going to be back to the old normal anytime soon. And so therefore, the innovators out there, and I was part of the Ontario Together Fund evaluating like dozens of, myself personally, and there were literally thousands of applications, tens of thousands, along the lines of innovations for helping us to reemerge from the pandemic. And a lot of them had to do with technology solutions of the type that you just described. And I just believe there's a ton of stuff coming down the pipe, and it's only a matter of months. I think the vaccine is going to play a big role, and some are holding their breath in terms of, do we go this way or that way? But it maybe it's dependent on some sort of direction with regards to vaccine, school openings. I think there's some big things that are just on the horizon that are really going to accelerate all the innovation in this sector. And a year from now, it might be quite different from what we're seeing today.
Okay, thank you. And Rafael, do you have any more closing remarks that you'd like to make before I wrap up for today?
No, we're basically quite on time, 2:59. So Christina, I'll let you go. But like one thing I would like to mention is the government developed a tool for safety guide to guide schools to reopening, and many of these is going to back to a 3-day program or maybe a full presence or 3 days and 2 days online. So there's a lot of facility supplies and education and training that needs to do for the safe reopening of the school, just to mention that. Besides that, I think what Stephen mentioned, the great challenge that is coming at to development, like a toolkit for all the different sectors and the main challenges for every single sectors. There is a lot of experts and available data that must be analyzed and interpreted. But some of these data is not available yet, but some additional information may become available soon. And then guidance need to be adapted to the new, whatever normal is going to be, or to your new business or the future businesses.
Well, I want to offer my thanks both to you, Stephen and Rafael, for outlining some tools related to business decision-making that will support the reopening of our spaces as we re-energize the innovation economy. Certainly the knowledge is critical for those who are making the next steps towards a re-entry in safer and comfortable and prepared and more compliant ways. I also really want to call out our partners at We Tech Alliance and Innovate Niagara for working collaboratively with us for better outcomes for Canadian entrepreneurs in our border cities and in urban and rural centers in between. It's always a pleasure working with the teams that span Southwestern Ontario's innovation corridor. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Rafael. And thank you to those of you who joined us today, including our partners from Innovate Niagara and We Tech Alliance. That's it for us today. Thanks so much for your time.